book smart, not street smart. Something rarer and considerably more dangerous than either. The kind of person who can walk into any room, face any pressure, absorb any provocation, and give the world absolutely nothing to work with. No flinch, no tells, no visible registration of the thing that was designed specifically to get under your skin. The kind of composure that does not come from not feeling things. It comes from having learned, through real understanding rather than suppression, that what you show is a weapon, and that you have been handing that weapon to people who use it against you every single day. Most people were never taught this. They were taught the opposite, that showing your feelings was courage, that emotional transparency was intimacy, that reacting visibly to things that affected you was proof of your humanity and your depth. Those things are true in the right rooms, with the right people, at the right moments. But most rooms are not the right rooms. Most people are not the right people. And the habit of reacting as if every room is safe and every person deserves your unfiltered response has been costing you in ways that accumulate quietly and land heavily. In negotiations where your eagerness was read before you spoke. In relationships where your triggers became someone else's leverage. In rooms where your visible reaction to a provocation told the person who provoked you exactly what they needed to know about how far they could push. You cannot be manipulated, pressured, or outmaneuvered as effectively when you cannot be read. That is not a philosophy. That is a tactical reality that the most effective people in every field of human endeavor, military strategy, political power, business negotiation, social dynamics, have understood and practiced for as long as people have been competing for anything. This video covers 10 things. 10 specific, historically grounded, psychologically real shifts that move you from being someone whose interior life is visible to anyone paying attention, to being someone whose next move nobody can confidently predict. Not because you have become cold or disconnected from your own experience, because you have finally understood that your reactions belong to you, and that you get to decide what to do with them, rather than letting the world decide for you. If some part of what you just heard landed somewhere true, if you recognize the specific cost of being too readable in too many rooms, do something right now before we go any further. Hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell. Every video on this channel is built on the same commitment. Real psychology, real history, real ideas that give you something you can actually use, delivered straight without the usual padding. You will want to be here for what comes next. And while you are reading this, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Your city, your country, the time it is where you are sitting with this. Something shifts when you look at a comment section and see someone in Manchester and someone in Nairobi and someone in Houston and someone in Manila, all sitting with the same question at different hours of the same day. It tells you, quietly but clearly, that the hunger to stop being so easily reached, so easily moved, so easily used through your own feelings, is one of the most universal experiences a person can have. You are not alone in wanting this, not even slightly. Now let us get into it. Right now, in this moment, before a single shift has happened, there is a version of you that exists in the minds of every person you interact with regularly. A map, a detailed, surprisingly accurate map of what produces what response in you, what makes you defensive, what makes you eager, what makes you shrink, what makes you over-explain, what makes you give more than the situation requires because the discomfort of not giving feels worse than the cost of giving. That map was not drawn all at once. It was built over time, interaction by interaction, through the entirely natural process of people paying attention to you and remembering what they observed. Some of those people drew the map with affection. They learned you because they loved you and wanted to understand you. But some of them drew it for different reasons. And the map in their hands is identical to the map in the loving person's hands, because a reaction does not carry a note explaining why it happened. It just registers. And what registers becomes intelligence. And intelligence, in the hands of someone who wants something from you, becomes leverage. Here's what that looked like in a real situation you have lived through. Think about a time when someone, in a meeting, in a negotiation, in a personal relationship, in a conversation where something you cared about was at stake, said something that landed exactly wrong, that hit the specific note that you cannot easily absorb. And before you had consciously decided to respond, the response was already on your face, already in your body, already visible in the way you shifted or tightened or went quiet or came forward. And the person who said it saw it and used it, not necessarily with grand strategy. Sometimes it is entirely instinctive, the way a predator does not strategize about pursuing exposed prey. It simply moves toward it. The exposure invited the pursuit. Your visible reaction to that provocation told them in real time that they had found something. And finding something, in any contest where something real is at stake, is a significant advantage. The question this video is going to answer is not how to stop feeling that thing. It is how to stop showing it, which is a completely different operation, and one that leaves everything authentic about your interior life intact, while removing it from public access. Watch any room where real stakes are being negotiated, where promotions are decided, where partnerships are formed or dissolved, where social hierarchies are being established or challenged, and you will see this without exception. The people who hold the most ground are almost never the most emotionally expressive ones, not because they feel less. The evidence suggests they often feel more, and more precisely, because they are paying closer attention, but what they feel stays internal long enough to be processed rather than immediately exploded. They are not suppressing, they are choosing, and that choice, made in the moment between stimulus and response, is where all of the power in this video lives. Here is a cost that most people have never actually totaled up, and totaling it up is uncomfortable enough that most people avoid it. How much have you already paid over the years for being too readable in the moments that mattered? Not as an abstract question, as a real accounting. Think about the negotiation where you named your number first, or where your enthusiasm for the outcome was visible before the terms were set, and the other party read that enthusiasm and used it to offer you less than they otherwise would have. Think about the relationship dynamic where someone learned, through your consistent and visible reaction to a specific behavior, that the behavior produced a reliable result, and kept using it, not necessarily with cruelty, but with the casual efficiency of someone who knows which button produces which output. Think about the professional situation where your reaction to a criticism, or your visible investment in a particular outcome, or your obvious discomfort in a specific kind of pressure, was the piece of information that defined how you were subsequently treated. Every one of those moments had a cost. The negotiation cost you money or terms or ground. The relationship dynamic cost you dignity and agency. The professional situation cost you positioning, or the perception of capability, or the respect of people whose respect was worth having. Small costs individually, compounded over years, over dozens of negotiations and hundreds of interactions and countless moments where your readable reaction gave someone else an advantage they would not have had if you had simply shown them less. The total is significant. Most people have never sat with that total. Most people manage the discomfort of it by telling themselves that authenticity is worth the cost, that being real is more important than being strategic, that the people who keep their reactions hidden are somehow diminished by the hiding. Those are comforting ideas. They are also, in a meaningful number of the situations that actually shape your life, incorrect. Authenticity and strategy are not opposites. You can be entirely, genuinely, profoundly yourself while simultaneously choosing, deliberately with full awareness, how much of that self is visible to the person across from you, and when, and in what context. The shift is not from authentic to hidden, it is from automatic to deliberate, and deliberate is where the power is. Seneca spent his life studying what distinguishes the person who is moved by circumstances from the person who moves through circumstances without being destabilized by them. And what he found, through decades of reflection and correspondence with people navigating real power in real Rome, was not that the stable person felt nothing. It was that the stable person had developed an interior life rich enough and well organized enough that external events did not immediately find purchase there. The way a well-built fortification does not immediately yield to the first assault, not because it is impenetrable, but because it was constructed with the knowledge that assaults would come. This specific mechanism through which your emotional reactions are turned against you is more precise than most people realize, and understanding its exact steps is what allows you to interrupt it at the right moment rather than too late. It does not begin with a dramatic confrontation. It begins with something that looks entirely benign. Observation. Someone watches you in a low-stakes situation and notices something. How you respond when interrupted. What your face does when your idea is dismissed. Whether you go quiet or loud when criticized. How you handle the moment when someone takes credit for something that belonged to you. None of these observations are threatening on their own. They are just data. The data accumulates, and accumulated data about a specific person's reactive patterns becomes something considerably more useful than casual curiosity. It becomes a key, a set of precise instructions for producing specific states in a specific person reliably, on demand. Then comes the testing phase, which almost nobody recognizes as such while it is happening. Small provocations, deployed in low-stakes moments, to verify that the observed pattern is reliable. A mild slight delivered with plausible deniability. A small dismissal framed as a joke. A subtle undermining of your position wrapped in the language of helpfulness. If the reaction confirms the map, if you respond the way the observation suggested you would, the map is marked as accurate, and the key is filed for use when something actually valuable is at stake. Finally, when the real moment comes, the promotion discussion, the negotiation, the relationship conversation where something genuinely matters, the key is used, not necessarily with full consciousness, often with the natural, instinctive efficiency of someone who has learned, through their own accumulated observation, that this is how this particular person works. And by that point, the person being worked has no idea the process has been running. They just feel somehow like they always end up on the back foot in interactions with this specific individual. Like they are always reacting rather than acting. Like the ground keeps shifting in a direction that consistently favors the other person. The map was drawn, the key was cut, and now it is being used. The countermove is not to become unobservable. People will always observe. The countermove is to become unreliable, to stop confirming the map, to produce responses that are so inconsistent with what has been recorded that the key stops fitting. Francis Bacon, who understood the intersection of knowledge and power more clearly than almost any figure in English intellectual history, observed that the person who can govern their own expression governs their own fate, because the person who cannot read you cannot use you. Different era, different context, same intelligence. The map is only as dangerous as your willingness to keep confirming it. So what does stopping the confirmation actually look like in practice? It does not look like stonewalling or refusing to engage or becoming the kind of person who is so relentlessly flat that they communicate nothing at all. That approach simply draws a different kind of map, one that marks you as either hostile or damaged, neither of which serves you. It looks like variance. Deliberate, practiced, internally chosen variance in your responses. The situation that always made you defensive, you respond to it with curiosity this time. The comment that always made you go quiet, you engage with it directly and without heat. The provocation that always produced the specific reaction they were counting on, you produce something else entirely, something that does not follow the script they have written for you. Not because you feel differently about what just happened, because you have decided that the script is theirs and the response is yours. The distinction sounds small. It is not. It is the difference between a person who has operated and a person who operates. Most people, when they think about developing composure, imagine it as a performance, a mask, something applied over the real response to hide it from view. And because they imagine it as a mask, they approach it as something dishonest, a suppression of their true self in service of an image they are trying to project. That framing is what makes composure feel wrong to genuinely feeling people, and it is why most genuinely feeling people never develop it. Because they are not willing to be dishonest, because authenticity matters to them, because they are not interested in performing a calm they do not feel. The problem with this framing is that it is fundamentally inaccurate. Real composure, the kind that Machiavelli observed in the figures he most admired and most warned against, the kind that Marcus Aurelius practiced and wrote about in his private journals, the kind that Sun Tzu understood as a prerequisite for genuine strategic intelligence, is not a performance. It is a practice, a developed capacity, a trained ability to allow an emotion to complete its arc internally, to be fully felt, fully acknowledged, fully processed, without immediately exporting it to the environment. The emotion happens, it is real, it is yours. It does not get suppressed or denied or treated as a problem to eliminate. It simply does not get broadcast. Not because you are ashamed of it, because you have decided, deliberately and with full awareness, that this specific emotion, in this specific moment, with this specific person, does not need to be shared, that it will serve you better as fuel than as signal, that the thing that just happened to you internally does not need to be announced to the room. And that decision, that small, daily, quietly revolutionary decision, is what separates the person who is managed through their feelings from the person who manages with them. Think about someone in your life who has this quality. Someone whose composure you have noticed and perhaps found slightly unnerving because you could not easily read them, could not be sure what they were thinking, could not find the angle through which to gauge where you stood. They were not cold. They were not robotic. They were entirely present, entirely engaged, just not transparent. And that opacity, however subtle, produced in you a recalibration, a slightly more careful approach, a heightened attention because you could not rely on their visible reactions to tell you whether you were on safe ground. That experience, that unconscious recalibration toward more care and more respect, is exactly what composure produces in the people around the person who has it. Not fear, not distance, recalibration, which is, in almost every situation where you want to be taken seriously and treated well, exactly what you need. Here is where the second half of this begins, and this is where the shifts stop being about what you prevent and start being about what you build. Everything covered so far has been about the exposed position, the map that gets drawn, the key that gets cut, the cost of being too readable in too many rooms. What comes now is the construction of the armored position, not a defensive crouch, an active, chosen, strategically intelligent way of moving through the world that keeps your interior life genuinely yours while giving you more range of motion in every situation that actually matters. You stop reacting to bait. This sounds obvious. It is not, because the most effective bait is never designed to look like bait. It is designed to look like information, an observation, a critique, a question, a casual comment that carries a hook inside it. The person who delivers it often does not consciously know it is bait. They have simply learned through accumulated experience of you that this particular kind of comment produces this particular kind of response, and they reach for it the way anyone reaches for a tool that has always worked. The comment about your work delivered just before you are about to present. The question about your personal life asked in a group setting in a tone that implies concern but lands as exposure. The comparison to someone else, your colleague, your sibling, your predecessor in a role, that is framed as observation but functions as destabilization. You know the specific version of this in your own life. You have felt it arrive. You have felt the spike of heat, or the tightening in your chest, or the rush of words that suddenly need to be said in self-defense. That internal experience is real, and it is yours. What changes now is this. The internal experience no longer produces an automatic external response. You feel the spike. You register the bait. And then you make a choice about what to do next, rather than having the choice made for you by the reflex. Sometimes the choice is to respond directly and without defensiveness. Sometimes it is to ask a question that redirects the energy back toward the person who sent it. Sometimes it is to say nothing, to let the comment sit in the air without you rushing to either defend against it or acknowledge it, until the silence makes clear that it did not find its target. All of those are chosen responses. None of them are automatic. And it is in the space between the bait landing and the response happening where your power lives. There is a quality that the most formidable people in any room carry that is almost impossible to describe, but immediately recognizable when you encounter it. It is the quality of someone who does not need the current situation to resolve in any particular way in order to remain fundamentally okay. Not indifference. They are fully engaged, fully present, fully invested in the outcome. But underneath the engagement there is something stable and non-negotiable. A floor. A baseline of self-possession that does not depend on the other person's behavior, the conversation going well, the decision landing favorably, or the approval being granted. It is the quality that makes certain people impossible to pressure, because pressure only works on someone whose stability is contingent on external conditions. Remove the contingency, build the floor, and the pressure has nothing to push against. It dissipates. The room recalibrates. And the person who came in with leverage finds they are holding something that no longer connects to anything. Marcus Aurelius came back to this idea more than almost any other across the private journals he kept during his reign. Journals he wrote for himself, never intending them to be read, which is part of what makes them so honest. He returned to it because he needed it. He was the most powerful man in the Western world, and he still faced, daily, the specific challenge that every person faces in every room where something is at stake. The temptation to let external circumstances determine his internal state, to be elevated by praise, destabilized by criticism, moved by the approval and disapproval of people whose judgment he did not actually respect. His private practice, the one he documented with more care and consistency than almost any other, was the cultivation of what he called the inner citadel, the interior place that no external event could reach without his permission, not a fortress of coldness, not a wall against feeling, but a stable ground from which he could engage fully with everything the world brought without being at the mercy of any of it. That is the target, not the absence of feeling. The presence of a floor. Building that floor is not a dramatic or sudden process. It happens the same way any foundation is built, incrementally, with consistency, in the daily moments that do not seem to matter rather than in the high-stakes ones that do. It is built every time you feel the pull toward an automatic reaction and you pause before letting it surface. Every time you sit with discomfort long enough to understand what it is telling you rather than immediately acting on it. Every time you remind yourself, in the moment that tests you, that your stability does not depend on this conversation going well, or this person approving of you, or this outcome landing the way you hoped. Each of those moments adds something to the floor. Not much on its own, but over time, across the hundreds of small moments where you practice the thing rather than just understanding it, the floor becomes real. Becomes something you can feel under your feet in the moments that count, becomes the quality that other people sense in you without being able to name, that unmistakable sense of someone who cannot be easily moved because they are standing on ground that does not shift. The way most people handle a direct attack on their character, their competence, or their value is one of the most reliable sources of ammunition for the person doing the attacking. Because the typical response, the immediate defense, the rehearsed rebuttal, the visible effort to restore a reputation that was just challenged, confirms, by the very energy of its desperation, that the attack landed somewhere real. The defense is the confession. Not a confession that the attack was accurate, a confession that it mattered, that the person attacking has successfully reached something, that they have found a pressure point that produces the specific, effortful response of someone whose grip on their own self-image is not as secure as they would like it to appear. The most counterintuitive and most effective response to a direct attack is not to defend against it. It is to make the defense unnecessary by the quality of your non-response. A calm, unhurried acknowledgement, not agreement, not dismissal, just acknowledgement, delivered without the heat that would signal impact, communicates something that no defense ever can. It communicates that the attack did not reach the floor, that the floor is real, is solid, and is considerably lower than the person attacking assumed, that there is more to this person than the point they thought they had found. The attacker facing that response must now recalibrate, They have fired their most reliable ammunition and found the target unmoved, which raises the question they were not expecting to have to ask. What exactly are they dealing with here? That question, that uncertainty, is your territory. Welcome to it. Sun Tzu observes that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And what this means in the context of social and psychological conflict is exactly this. The person who can absorb an attack without being visibly affected by it has effectively won without entering the contest, because the contest was designed to produce a visible reaction. No reaction means no contest, and no contest means the other person has spent their ammunition and has nothing to show for it. They did not get the ground they were trying to take. They did not confirm the vulnerability they were trying to expose. They are left standing in a field holding a weapon that did not fire, and you are standing exactly where you were when they arrived, solid and unreadable, having given them nothing. Here is the specific daily practice that makes everything in this video a reality, rather than a concept you understand intellectually, but struggle to live. Because understanding is not the same as having it. You can read everything ever written about composure, and still flinch the next time the specific thing that always gets you gets deployed. The gap between knowing and having is closed by one thing and one thing only. Repetition in low-stakes situations before the high-stakes ones arrive. You do not develop this capacity in the moments that matter most. You develop it in the moments that matter least. In the ordinary conversation where someone says something mildly irritating, and instead of registering the irritation in your face, you simply notice it internally and let it pass without export. In the meeting where something unfair happens, and instead of the visible reaction that everyone in the room has come to expect from you, there is just presence, attentive, engaged, giving nothing away. In the social situation where the bait is deployed in its mildest form and you catch it before it hooks, and you choose your response rather than having it chosen for you. These are training repetitions. Every one of them makes the next one slightly easier. Every moment of chosen composure in a low-stakes situation builds a small increment of the floor, the stable interior ground that eventually becomes solid enough to hold you in the high-stakes moments too. The person who seems to have this naturally did not have it naturally. They built it in exactly this way. One small chosen response at a time, until the gap between the stimulus and their reaction became wide enough that choice could live in it. That gap is what this is all about. The gap is the whole game. Something that nobody mentions when they talk about developing this kind of composure is the loneliness of it. Real, specific loneliness. Because when you stop exporting every reaction, when you stop being fully readable to the people around you, some of those people will experience your composure as distance. They will read your control as coldness. They will interpret your refusal to be baited as arrogance or detachment, or the one that lands most accurately because it is partially true, as not being fully present with them. And some of those people will tell you so, clearly and with feeling, in a way that is designed, consciously or not, to re-elicit the transparency you have chosen to stop giving. This is the test. The test is not the original provocation, the bait, the pressure in the room. The test is this moment. The moment when someone who has benefited from your readability names your new composure as a problem and asks you to go back to being the version of yourself they could more easily navigate. Everything in you that values connection, that understands relationships require vulnerability, that knows love and friendship require some degree of real openness, all of that will hear that request and feel the pull. The answer is not to harden against the pull. The answer is to become precise about it, to understand the difference between genuine intimacy, which requires real openness with the right people in the right moments, and the performance of openness on demand for people who have learned to use it. The first is sacred and should be protected. The second is not intimacy, it is access. And access, unlike intimacy, is not something you owe to everyone who asks for it. Every concept in this video, the map being drawn through your reactions, the cost you have already paid for being too readable, the mechanism through which bait is deployed and tested and used, the distinction between composure as performance and composure as practice, the quality of the floor, and how to build it. The non-response is the most effective response to a direct attack. The daily training in low-stakes situations, the loneliness of becoming less readable. Every single one of these is real and useful. Every one of them will change something specific about how you operate. But here is what needs to be said about all of them together, because without understanding this, you will make progress for a while, and then find yourself sliding back into old patterns in the situations where the stakes are highest. They are all moves in a smaller game, and the smaller game only makes sense when you understand the larger one that contains it. The larger game is this. Every human system, every workplace, every social environment, every family structure, every intimate relationship, every negotiation table, runs on information asymmetry. The person who knows more about the other person than the other person knows about them holds a structural advantage that no individual tactic can fully compensate for. Composure is not, at its deepest level, about being hard to rattle. It is about managing information asymmetry in your favor. Every reaction you withhold is a piece of information you have kept off the table. Every moment of unreadability is a piece of your position that remains unknown to the person across from you. Every time you let the bait land without responding to it, you preserve the uncertainty about your position that makes you harder to outmaneuver. The map stays incomplete. The key stays uncut. The person who wants to manage you through your reactions finds, repeatedly, and without being able to name why, that you are somehow harder to reach than most people, that their usual approaches do not produce the usual results, that they need to bring more care, more thought, more genuine respect to their interactions with you, because the shortcuts they rely on with more readable people do not work here. This is what Machiavelli was pointing at in his most misunderstood passages, the ones where he seems to advocate for coldness or calculation or something that, stripped of context, reads as the advice of a cynical man with a dark view of human nature. What he was actually pointing at was the larger game, the understanding that the world contains a significant number of people who operate from pure self-interest, who will use whatever information they can gather about you in service of outcomes that benefit them, and that the person who understands this and responds not with bitterness or paranoia, but with strategic intelligence, with the conscious, chosen management of what they reveal, will navigate that world with infinitely more grace and effectiveness than the person who either never sees it or sees it and despairs. What you now carry is a different understanding of what your reactions actually are, not evidence of your humanity, not proof of your depth and feeling. They are all of those things, yes, but they are also intelligence. Operational intelligence about your position, your vulnerabilities, your needs, your fears, and your tells. And intelligence belongs to whoever holds it. From here forward, you hold it. Not because you have stopped feeling. Not because you have decided to become someone harder or colder or less connected to your own interior life. Because you have understood, finally and completely, what is actually at stake in the gap between what happens to you and what you show the world. That gap is your ground. Defend it, not with aggression, not with performance, not with the loud, visible effort of someone trying to appear untouchable. With the quiet, settled, daily practice of someone who has decided that their interior life belongs to them, that their reactions are assets to be managed rather than reflexes to be surrendered, and who carries that decision into every room they enter from this point forward. The person who used to be so easy to read, the person whose tells were mapped, whose triggers were cataloged, whose reactions could be produced on demand by anyone who had paid enough attention. That person's territory just changed. The map they drew is no longer accurate, and the next person who reaches for the key they cut is going to find, quietly and without drama, that it no longer fits. Here is the full accounting of what this video covered and what you carry out of it. The map that gets drawn through your reactions and how consistently you have been confirming it for people who use it against you. The real cost, totaled honestly, of years of being too readable in the moments that mattered most. The specific mechanism, observation, testing, deployment, and where in that sequence you can now interrupt it. The crucial distinction between composure as dishonest performance and composure as the developed practice of an honest person who has decided their interior life belongs to them. The floor. What it is, what it does to the people around you, and how the person who has it cannot be pressured the same way as the person who does not. The non-response as the most powerful response to a direct attack, and why the defense is often the confession. The daily practice in low-stakes situations that makes the high-stakes moments manageable. The loneliness of becoming less readable, and the important distinction between genuine intimacy and demanded access, and the game behind the game. Information asymmetry as the real architecture of every human system, and composure as the most consistent and durable way to manage it in your favor. What you now know can be used to protect yourself from the people who have been reading you and using what they read. But it can also be used to do to others exactly what has been done to you, to become the person who draws the map, cuts the key, tests the pattern, and deploys it when something valuable is at stake. That line exists. I am not pretending it does not. What I will say about it is this. The most formidable people in the historical record were not the ones who ran every tactic in the playbook on every person they encountered. They were the ones who understood the playbook well enough to recognize when it was being run on them, and who chose, with full awareness of the alternatives, to use that understanding primarily as a shield rather than a weapon. That choice is yours now. Make it deliberately. Make it with the full weight of what you now understand about what it means to be readable, and what it costs, and what it is worth to stop being so easily reached. Drop your phrase in the comments if this landed somewhere real. 3 words. I show nothing. Not as a boast, as a decision. The decision to stop letting the world read you like an open book and start being, finally, the author of what gets seen. Don't stop here. The next video builds directly on what you now know, and without it, this one is only half the picture.